Welcome everyone to Module 5 of Coping Skills, Communication and Assertiveness. In this first video, we're going to talk about what is communication, how we communicate, and different types of communication. In our next video, we're going to talk about assertiveness and different tips and tricks that you can incorporate in your everyday life to communicate effectively. So what is communication? Communication is an exchange of your thoughts or feelings to others. Basically, you want others around you to know what it is you're thinking and feeling. And communication, it can be small things that we do every day, asking how somebody's day is going. Or it can be bigger, more serious things like sitting down and telling your significant other you want a divorce. Communication can be big or small and anywhere in between. This can be done with yourself and one other person. It can be done with yourself and hundreds, thousands of other people. Or you can communicate with the entire world. It's all about expressing what you think and feel to others. So we're going to talk about communication, and we're going to talk about these 4 terms to break it down. So first off, sender. The sender is the individual who wants to get their information out there, who wants to share their thoughts and feelings. This is usually the person that initiates conversation or communication. Next, we have the message. That's what you want to get out there. That's what you want to tell people about. Next, you have the receiver. That's the person that you want to get your message to. And then finally, your channel. That's how you're communicating. And then there's a whole different variety of channels in which you communicate. Talking is one way of communicating. Sending an email, talking on a telephone, sending a text message, writing in a book. Even this video is a channel of communication. So let's break this down in a few examples. So let's start with this video. I, the sender, am trying to get information about coping skills, that's the message, to you, the receiver, through the medium of video. This can be with you trying to get information to your significant other. So you, the sender, is sending a message about being upset about the dirty dishes, the message, to the receiver, your significant other, and you're doing it through the channel of talking. There can be other more obscure ways that we can do this too. So think of a book. So the author, who is the sender, writes a book, that's the message, and he's trying to get it to you, the receiver, through reading the book, and it's doing it through the channel of a novel or a book. So the message, whatever the content inside, but the book, the novel, that's the channel. And it's very interesting that communication, it can happen instantly in the moment. It can happen over long periods of time, where I could record some of these videos months, years ago before you ever see them. Or books can be written long after somebody's gone and has passed away centuries ago, but the information's still getting to you. And they're important to understand. Next time you're in a conversation with somebody, look, who's the sender, who's the receiver, what's the message, and what channel are you using? And it's important to note with channels is that the etiquette and the way we communicate can be very different depending on what channel we're using. If I'm sending an email versus talking to somebody, the words I'm going to use, the tone I'm going to have is completely different. Same thing with sending a text message. The etiquette for texting is completely different than you would have a conversation back and forth with individuals. Communication is a very diverse and detailed topic, but what we're going to be spending most of our time talking about in this video is communication using the channel of talking back and forth in person, in the present time. So now specifically we're going to talk about how we communicate. And we're going to talk about how we communicate conversationally, back and forth, in the present moment. We're not going to worry about how we communicate in emails or text messages or on Facebook. Those are all very different things with their own etiquette. We're going to talk about how to communicate in person, in present, back and forth, live. So we usually do that 2 ways, verbally and non-verbally. Verbally is pretty basic. It's the words that we're saying. It's the information leaving our mouth. So I say, I feel sad today. That's my verbal communication. The words I feel sad are the verbal communication that I'm putting out there. Non-verbal communication is a little more complex and different. So things like body language is part of our non-verbal communication. They're things that we're not saying, but others are able to pick up by looking at us and reading what we say. So body language can be things like, if we're standing with our arms crossed versus our arms open, it can be 2 very different meanings. Typically this means you're a little bit more guarded, a little bit more closed off, not willing to share as much, whereas this shows open. If you have bad posture, if you're slumped over or sitting in a chair slumped over, it can show disinterest in what you're saying or trying to communicate. Either what you're putting out there or what you're, if somebody's saying a message to you, It can show you're disinterested by your posture. Other things like looking at your watch can show that you're not interested as well. If you're picking at your hand, biting your nails, kind of pacing back and forth, really jittery. These are body languages, things that show that we have some kind of meaning behind our emotions. So picking at our hands and stuff can show that we're anxious. It's anything that's not verbally said, but we're able as individuals, as people, to pick up, there's something else here. There's a meaning behind these body actions. Facial expressions is a big one too. We might say, yeah, I'm having a good day, but my facial expression would say, no, I'm not. People are very good at reading the facial expressions of others. And we have facial expressions, we talked about in a few modules again, that are associated with each emotion. And we recognize them. A smile means happy, a frown means sad, a really angry, ridged brow means anger. So we can look at somebody's face, and even though the verbal communication might say something, the nonverbal communication might say something else. Another big part of nonverbal communication is tone, how we say things. If our voice is very somber and lower register, it can mean that we're a little bit sad, versus if we talk really loud and happy and energetic, it can mean that we're really passionate about a topic. How we say things is very important, and you know this all the time of saying like, is everything okay? Yeah, everything's okay. My verbal communication says, oh yeah, perfect, I'm fine, but my nonverbal, my tone, shows that there's something else going on here, that I'm a little bit tired. It shows there's something else going on here that maybe, yeah, I say I'm fine, but am I really fine? So it's important to keep in mind what these things mean. So if you're trying to communicate, make sure that your body language actually matches what you're trying to say. Because if you're trying to say one thing, but your body language says something else, it can be mixed messages for the receiver. And it's also important to keep in mind, take all these things with a grain of salt. Maybe somebody looks at their watch, not because they're bored with what you're saying, but because they have an important meeting coming up and they don't want to miss it. These are common things that we recognize as a society to mean certain things, but it's not always true. Remember, you only understand and know for sure your thoughts and your feelings. You can't control others, you don't know what others are thinking or feeling. So it's important with communication to even communicate about communication. Be open and willing to share and discuss what these things mean, and don't assume in situations what they mean, because when you assume things, it turns into this whole thing in your mind that might not even be real. So make sure that you understand where somebody else is coming from, really listen to what they're saying, and don't assume things based on their body language or their tone. Really listen to what they're saying in communication. So that's a grain of salt to take when you're considering body language. But for the most part, these are universal truths that we understand. Now that we've gone over what communication is and how we communicate, we're going to talk about 4 different types of communication. Passive communication is usually about the sender being more concerned about offending or hurting the feelings of the receiver, rather than respecting their own self and actually getting their message across. Passive communication is usually associated with kind of poor body posture, poor eye contact, a facial expression that might look nervous or sad, could have arms crossed to represent that they're a little bit guarded, things like that. We then have aggressive communication style, which is never really a productive communication style, because when you have an aggressive communication style, it's all about winning the argument. It's not about communicating effectively back and forth, it's about winning whatever it is that you're trying to get across. And as soon as you engage in an aggressive communication style, the other person's walls get up and communication isn't going to happen. It's usually just a back and forth argument at that point. So aggressive communication style is usually have your fists are gritted, you might be puffing up your chest, standing tall, talking in a very loud tone, but not a positive loud. It's kind of yelling back and forth. Your facial expression can get very squinted in, kind of that angry brow and that tightening of the jaw. It's a very aggressive stance, and when you communicate in that manner, you're not taking in any consideration of the receiver. It's all about you and trying to get your point across in a way that is not respectful of the person you're trying to get it across to. We have a combination of this in our third communication style, which is passive-aggressive communication. Passive-aggressive communication style is when the sender, again, much like aggressive, doesn't really care or respect the needs of the receiver. They want to win by getting their point across, but they do it in a less confrontational way. So they'll say things that to core about them winning the conversation, but really don't matter what the receiver thinks or feels. They just want to win it and do it in a non-confrontational way. And passive-aggressive, it might look a lot like the one we're talking about next, assertiveness. You have a little bit of confidence, but it really comes across in the tone of the things you're saying. They might sound passive or assertive, but in reality they're actually very aggressive in nature. And then we finally have assertive. So this is the perfect middle ground between being aggressive and being passive. It's about getting your message across, standing up for yourself, making sure that the receiver hears and understands what you're saying, but you do it in a way that is respectful to them and respectful to yourself. Being assertive usually has good eye contact, you have a strong posture, your tone of voice would be a little bit elevated, but you would not be angry or yelling. You usually have a relaxed stance where your arms are open.